My name is Tony Juniper and I'm here to speak about 21st century challenges. I'm a sustainability advisor working with a whole range of different organisations, but mostly with the Prince of Wales's Rainforest project as a special advisor and also as a senior associate with the Cambridge University Programme for Sustainability Leadership, an outfit that's basically seeking to have sustainability engagement with companies and other large organisations. For many years I worked for Friends of the Earth and was the director there for 6 years, leaving in 2008. The public and political and indeed the science debate about climate change tends to be dominated by questions of how we can reduce industrial emissions from power stations, factories, houses, and also from vehicles and aeroplanes. Of course, that's a huge part of the problem, but what is less often talked about is how about a fifth of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from deforestation. And if you look at the projections of the cuts needed during the 21st century, it's quite clear that we can't do what we need to do in terms of reducing the pollution that's causing global warming without having a major effect on reducing the rate of tropical deforestation. The reason the rainforests are being cut down, roughly the size of England every year, is still being lost despite 2 decades of efforts to have a different outcome. The main reason this is continuing is for economic reasons. The countries of the tropical regions aren't cutting these forests down for fun, they're cutting them down in order to provide natural resources into global and domestic markets, timber and minerals for example, and also are looking for ways to grow GDP by entering international commodity markets for agricultural produce, soya beans and palm oil for example. So if we're going to find a durable solution to stopping deforestation, it has to be economic in nature. And many people have now concluded, including the Prince of Wales's Rainforest project, that a major programme of financial transfer is needed from the rich world to the poorer countries that have the rainforests in order to provide economic alternatives. And how that money is raised is a large and complicated question, but we do believe it is possible to raise the many billions needed every year to do this job. And actually, if one looks at the ecosystem service benefits that come from rainforests, this is an absolute bargain. A tiny quantity of the finance needed compared to the benefits we get can actually reverse this trend pretty quickly. And so that now I think is one of the world's top political priorities, is creating the consensus for that financial transfer so that these countries can invest in a different kind of development than that based upon clearing more of these globally significant ecosystems away. Everybody hopes that the climate change summit in Copenhagen this year will deliver some kind of solution on deforestation, but it will need to be grounded in the real economics of the issue. And unfortunately, even if there is some attempt to create a global ecosystem services market or to create some new funding mechanism, it will take something like a decade at least before major financial flows are coming from that deal in a way that's going to be meaningful for the countries that have these rainforests. So a lot of people, including the Prince's Rainforest project, are arguing for an emergency funding mechanism to be put in place right away, irrespective of the outcomes from Copenhagen, so that we can see financial benefits to these countries very quickly. But whichever way you look at the Copenhagen politics, this is an extremely difficult equation, with countries collectively having to agree a combination of, for example, industrialised country emission reduction targets to build on the first round of the Kyoto Protocol, to agree the funding and institutional mechanisms needed to help countries adapt to what now will be inevitable global climate change, to look at how there can be a credible mechanism for technology transfer, so for example that countries in the hotter regions can get solar power and countries like India and China can get their hands on carbon capture and storage very quickly. That needs to be agreed. And then of course the forests on top of that. So this is going to be a complicated and demanding challenge, perhaps more complicated than any political challenge that the world has ever faced up to, but the rainforests must be at the centre of this. And there has to be every step taken now by political leaders between this point and that Copenhagen summit to make sure that the chances of success are maximised, because this could literally be our last chance. The international community has been wrestling with the idea of how to get maximum benefit for the money being invested in development and environment outcomes through transfers between countries for decades, and there are no easy answers to this. Inevitably there will be some wastage, inevitably there will be some inefficiencies, and inevitably there will be some corruption. But this mustn't be the reason why the international community now reduces its ambition in rising to these challenges of low carbon growth. Certainly it's possible to put in place some safeguards, and one of the things that clearly has emerged over many decades of development experience is how it's essential to involve stakeholders and local communities in the expenditure that comes through the donor community, so that this isn't about transfers between governments, it's about transfers from the rich to the poor, literally, and looking at this as a country-level challenge in terms of involving local communities, indigenous people, NGOs, companies, regional government, local government, as well as national government. And if you can start to create the structures that enable there to be a transparent, participatory process, then it's more likely that we will get more value for our money. But we can't hold back on transferring the sums needed just because we've had bad experiences in the past. One of the biggest challenges prevailing in many of the tropical rainforest countries is continuing disputes and conflicts over land. Who controls the land? Who owns the land? Who's got what rights to do what with the land? Where do indigenous rights end and where do national governments' jurisdictions begin? All of these kind of questions have for decades dogged attempts to make serious inroads into cutting tropical deforestation. In Brazil, for example, much of the land outside protected areas and indigenous reserves is in dispute. There isn't legal title to that land. So in terms of pulling policy levers that require or encourage people to do certain things, it's kind of impossible to do that without the legal certainty of actually who should be occupying different bits of territory in the first place. You can't put in place incentives very easily to encourage more sustainable agriculture or to stabilise farming if in the first place it's not clear who owns what territory. So this is a crucial factor that has to be part of the mix in terms of how the international community looks at stopping tropical deforestation, and really is, in a policy sense, it's about turning the lights on so that we can shed some light and some opportunity to be able to deal with some of these bigger questions of sustainable farming, population movement, how to achieve sustainable development in remote rural areas. So it is a fundamental process that has to occur in many countries and really has to be part of how the Copenhagen talks and how any other funding mechanisms are conceived. We have to be looking at this as one of the preconditions for success, clarifying land tenure.